What's going on, guys? Hey, we're back. We have a new video from Warfronts. We just recently found this channel maybe a week or so ago, and man, these guys are good. This guy Simon Whistler, this whole channel does a really good job of breaking some things down. So this one specifically says another war is starting in the Middle East, and this is off the back of one of my more recent videos where I said World War III, right? This big clickbaity title, but I do believe, and if you've been following this channel for a while, that we have been in World War III ever since the North Koreans came to Russia and were fighting on behalf of Russia, fighting Ukrainians. So I do very much believe this. So I don't know if that's what this is going to be about, but it is about the Middle East. So we're going to watch this. Before we do, it is August. We have a brand new t-shirt out. It is potentially my favorite shirt. So I don't know. I like them all, but I'm biased. But it's one of my favorite shirts so far. We've got the Anti-Putin Social Club, baby. On the front, you've got the APSC on the sleeve. On the sleeve. On the sleeve. You've got the different breed, of course, stitched in there. And then you got the big Anti-Putin Social Club. So like I said in the last video where I was talking about this shirt is not for your B-type personalities. Let's put it that way. This is for B. This is definitely for your A-type personalities. Like, you put this thing on and you stomp around proudly. And if you get a pro-Russian supporter in your town, you may end up going fisticuffs with this dude because of this t-shirt. I don't know, but it is definitely a very loud statement. If you want one, grab one. We've got white and black options. Excuse me. Also, we've got our Discord we keep all of our uncensored footage there, the nasty, disgusting stuff you guys seem to like, in a channel for our members, and also tons of other resources for anybody who joins the Discord. All right, guys. Let's jump into it, baby.
There's a new war in the Middle East. Yes, that's right, ladies and gents. In the year that just keeps on giving, we've got another one on our hands. This time, it's around Yemen, where the Houthi rebels have steadily been expanding their campaign against their arch-nemesis to the north, Saudi Arabia. It started a little over a week ago, and back then it looked like it just might be another few tit-for-tat exchanges, but it has snowballed into something that we can no longer ignore. The Houthi rebels have declared a blockade of Saudi exports and followed it up with strikes on shipping and oil refineries alike, only to top things off the other day with the possibility of imposing tolls in a strait off their coast that's the third busiest on Earth. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? While this conflict is technically between the rebels and Riyadh and not directly part of the Iran war, there's really no such thing as a self-contained war in this part of the world. And that suggests things might be about to get a whole lot worse. Have you ever?
Well, there's no such thing as a war against a terrorist organization that doesn't involve Iran. Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terror. They fund these units, they supply these units take orders from Iran. So yeah.
A new war. Now, despite all the news that's been flowing out of the Middle East this year, there's one country that's been more or less absent from the headlines: Yemen. A fragile ceasefire was reached between the internationally recognized Yemeni government, which is based in the eastern city of Aden, and the Ansar Allah Houthi rebels, who set up shop along the west coast back in 2022. To most international observers' surprise, it actually held. The two factions still hated each other, but for a country that had descended in the 2010s into a full-blown disaster of a civil war, it was welcome reprieve. So when the Iran war ignited back in February, there were concerns that it could spread to Yemen. The Houthi rebels are, after all, longtime allies of the Islamic Republic, so it wouldn't have been entirely surprising to see them join the fray on behalf of their buddies in Tehran. In the months that followed, they mostly stayed quiet, though. There were a few instances of them launching a ballistic missile here or a few drones there, usually directed at Israel. But let's be honest, with everything else that was flying across the Middle East skies at the time, this amounted to little more than a reminder that, guys, we're still here. Hey! Lately, though, it seems like the Houthis want the limelight back, starting their own military campaign. It all seems to trace back to early July, when the group defied Saudi-led restrictions by inviting an Iranian delegation to visit Sana'a, in what was the first flight between the two countries in more than a decade. Houthi delegations had made a few trips to Tehran for the funeral of the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, with Iranian advisors traveling back the other way afterwards. On the 13th, As an aircraft returning from Tehran was on final approach to Sana'a, it was forced to divert after explosions destroyed a part of the airport. Yemen's internationally recognized government claimed responsibility for the strike, defending the move as their attempt to prevent an unauthorized Iranian flight from landing. The Houthis, for their part, pointed the finger at Saudi Arabia. That dispute still hasn't been settled, but what is clear is why the plane landing there would have been such a problem. According to a report from Reuters, citing sources in both Tehran and Aden, as many as 21 IRGC personnel have been on that plane, along with the returning Houthi delegation. It was ultimately able to land somewhere else in Yemen, but it was game on regardless. The Houthi rebels responded by launching a combination of missiles and drones at Abha International Airport across the border. And while Saudi state media said it was able to successfully intercept that volley, it's hard to see how they can let such an attack stand. Whether or not all of this results in a return to war between Riyadh and Sana'a isn't certain, but it is certainly leaning in that direction. Alison Miner, a Middle East policy expert at the Atlantic Council, went on record as saying, quote, "I think we're very close to a resumption of all-out war. I'm not seeing an off-ramp right now." The interesting, and perhaps alarming, part of this is the role that the Houthis play in the region.
It's basically what I've said, man. It's hard to see an off-ramp when you're talking about religious fanatics. These people don't care if they are under bombardment or under siege for days, weeks, months, even years. They don't care, dude. This is an ideology to them. This is for their God. This is for their afterlife, what they're doing now. So, and they don't care if their people suffer, dude. The Iranian people have been victims and have been suffering for decades. The IRGC doesn't care.
Back when the Iran war began, there was understandable worry that the Houthis might leap in to defend their allies in Tehran. But that didn't come to pass. Unlike groups who did go down the self-sacrifice route for Iran, we're looking at you, Hezbollah, the Houthis have always operated far more independently. Friendly with Tehran? Yeah, sure, but ultimately unwilling to dive headfirst into a war that they aren't sure they can win. That makes their entry now significantly more concerning because what they've done is watch Iran hold Hormuz hostage with a combination of missiles and drones and conclude, we could do that too.
Yeah.
And that sucks for a world that is already dealing with the closure of Hormuz. Because the Houthis are not just sitting alongside any old waterway, but one of the most important in the world. One exit left. When it comes to narrow choke points of water in the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz is naturally what's going to come to mind before anything else. And for good reason too. Iran's ability to hold Washington, and by extension the international community, hostage over the issue has dominated headlines for months. But for those wanting to get oil out of the Middle East by boat, Hormuz is actually not the only option. There are two others, though they're smaller and not accessible to all of the Gulf states. Both empty out from the Arabian Peninsula's west coast, one being the Suez Canal to the north, which leads into the Mediterranean Sea, and the other is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which gets you into the Indian Ocean by way of the Gulf of Aden. Suez is solely under control of the Egyptian government, which has no intention of shaking the status quo, since it's a great little money spinner. The Bab el-Mandeb, however, is a narrow body of water between the coasts of Djibouti and, you guessed it, Houthi-controlled Yemen. Anyone who followed the Gaza war will likely be able to guess where this one is headed, because these guys ran a similar playbook 3 years ago. Starting in November 2023, the Houthis began firing on commercial vessels they alleged were Israeli-linked in solidarity with the Palestinian cause, opening by boarding the carrier Galaxy Leader and eventually sinking 4 separate ships off their coast. The US and the UK launched a joint operation aimed at stopping the attacks, but only had limited success. The rebels kept firing until a ceasefire was reached between Israel and Hamas late last year. Traffic has not returned to where it was pre-2023. For all of the Iran war, though, Bab el-Mandeb has remained open for transit. This has been to the chagrin of Tehran, which has repeatedly threatened to have the Houthis close it in a Hormuz-like fashion, only to have Sana'a be like, "Nah, we're good, bro." Unfortunately, that now appears to be a thing of the past. Back on July the 20th, the Houthis announced that they would be implementing a blockade on all shipping from Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States as part of the escalating war. They made good on their threat within 2 days. On July the 22nd, they hit the vessel Encilia off the southern Saudi city of Jizan, as well as claiming to have struck the Layla in a similar region. At least one more Saudi-linked ship was struck over the following week, the most recent at the time of recording being the NCC Ghazel on July the 28th. Alongside the tankers, The missiles started landing at Saudi ports themselves. US-designed Patriot interceptor batteries brought down at least 2 ballistic missiles aimed at the port city of Yanbu, while the refinery closer to the border with Yemen at Jazan took direct hits. Riyadh hasn't said what actually got through. But whatever it was, it did enough damage that they had to shut down the refinery entirely and pull 400,000 barrels of oil a day of production offline. 400,000 barrels is not a small amount, especially given the global energy crisis as a result of what's going on in Hormuz. But realistically, if Riyadh had to choose which one they'd rather lose, it'd be Jazan any day. Yanbu is not an ordinary city for the kingdom. It's the endpoint of the 750-mile pipeline running clear across the country from the oil fields on the Gulf Coast, which is what lets them bypass Hormuz at all. They've been running the thing at absolute maximum capacity for months, taking it from a pre-war baseline of roughly 1 million barrels of oil per day all the way to nearly 5 million. Data from Kepler shows that Yanbu accounted for 92% of all Saudi seaborne crude exports as of June, so when it comes to this city, it is all or nothing. At least at the time of recording, there is still traffic flowing through the Bab el-Mandeb, but it's already starting to show signs of strain. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, at least 4 tankers carrying Saudi crude have turned around before reaching the strait and reversed course to head north to the Suez Canal, where seaborne oil transit is running at its highest volume in years. The route through Suez can only alleviate so much, though. For starters, sailing through Suez is not guaranteed. The Houthis being able to hit the city of Yanbu itself would risk shutting down Riyadh's export abilities at the source. And even if Patriot interceptors are able to keep the city safe, there's still the pipeline that runs, across the entire country that's just sitting there, waiting for whatever Yemen might throw at it. Shooting aside for a moment, though, the man-made Suez has physical limits that make it a poor substitute for natural bodies of water. It's too shallow to take on a fully loaded supertanker, so the industry built an entire class of ship which can fit through it carrying 1 million or so barrels, which they so creatively named the Suez Max. That's only half of what the regular tankers can carry, so right off the bat, there are going to be issues. Even if you could double down on Suez Maxing, though, it doesn't change the geography going on here. Ships take the Bab el-Mandeb to reach Africa and Asia, which sits south and east of it. Suez sends them northwest. A trip from Yanbu to Eastern Asia that normally takes 16 days would now mean crossing the Mediterranean and going the long way around Africa, stretching the whole thing to around 50 days. And that is the part that turns a Saudi problem into everyone's problem. And while Riyadh might not have imagined 2026 playing out like this, they recognize the threat this poses to them and are already taking measures to shore up a coalition to keep traffic flowing as best as possible. Saudi Arabia is hiring. Now, the thing about all of this is that realistically speaking, Saudi Arabia would almost certainly rather be doing anything other than discussing their neighbor to the south again. They haven't exactly had a great relationship in years gone by. Even before the civil war broke out, they were well underway to building a giant wall to seal off the entirety of the Yemeni border. Build that wall. Blast from the past. Once fighting did break out, they launched a military operation to restore the internationally recognized government to power across the entirety of Yemen, expecting it to last a matter of weeks. As is pretty much the eternal case when it comes to the Middle East, though, you can fast forward by years and the fighting is still going on. The Saudis were sincerely hoping that the 2022 peace deal would allow Riyadh to finally close the lid on that chapter of Middle East misadventures, because they had quite an ambitious plan they were far more interested in anyway. Vision 2030, which Mohammed bin Salman announced back in 2016, was aimed at fundamentally transforming a kingdom that had long been an odd mix of extreme oil wealth and an underdeveloped, ultra-conservative Islamic society. The idea was to spend the oil money to supercharge their economy into something that would no longer run on their liquid gold, and ultimately usher in tourism, stadiums, overpaid comedians flying out to cash the biggest paycheck of their lifetimes, and, of course, foreign investments.
They've been working so hard to make this, I guess kind of trying to westernize in a way, but also make their country look, I don't know, how would I say this? Look enticing for foreigners, right? To draw in tourism, because the Middle East has such a negative connotation because of decades of war and terrorists and all kinds of stuff. But Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, they got it going on, dude, and they got a lot of cool stuff going on. So basically, they're trying to be like, "Hey, everybody, look at us. We're not Iran. We're not Afghanistan. We're not Iraq. We're like our own thing. We don't even like those guys, and we got a lot of cool stuff going on here." And then the Houthis in Iran are like, "Psych, we're gonna throw some drones into your cities, and all that effort that you've been putting into making your cities look more invitable, more enticing is just going to go out the window because now they're dangerous."
None of this was ever going to get very far, with Houthi missiles and drones coming down on various infrastructure on even a semi-regular basis, as they had been for years before the 2022 peace deal, including a now infamous strike on an Aramco fuel depot in the city of Jeddah that went up in flames just 1 week before the ceasefire took hold. That reluctance to return to all-out war has not changed today, but Riyadh is increasingly finding itself with limited options. Because just when you thought this couldn't get any worse, Reuters reported this week that the Houthis are thinking about implementing their own transit fees on all commercial shipping moving through the southern Red Sea. Well, all except for China, which asked for and repeatedly received a special carve-out, so that's nice for them. Those 20 or so Iranian advisors that the government in Aden is trying to stop from landing in Sana'a, by the way, weren't visiting there on holiday, as beautiful as the Yemeni coastline may be. No. According to the same Reuters report, they were actually in Yemen to help the Houthis get this toll booth set up in the first place. Keep in mind, the Islamic Republic created what it calls the Persian Gulf Strait Authority back in May, specifically to collect tolls for ships crossing Hormuz. They pitched the idea as them providing a service, but given that what vessels are actually paying for is just assurance that Iran won't fire on them, it's more of a mob-style shakedown, isn't it? Nonetheless, the hardliners in Tehran have become the go-to guys on how to get such a wheeze started. This may have been the tipping point for Saudi Arabia, which the Houthis can only push so far before they get some sort of response beyond a limited tit-for-tat airstrike. On Wednesday, our monitor broke the exclusive story that Riyadh had been assembling a massive international force designed to keep shipping through the Bab el-Mandeb open and free of tolls, fees, or services that the Houthis might be inclined to sell to you. There are at least 50 separate countries who have been invited, and at least at the time of recording, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, and Djibouti, which sits just opposite Yemen on the waterway, have all signed on to the coalition. Pakistan and Turkey have both received invites as well and are reportedly still mulling over whether to join. But given the already deepening relationship between the two and Saudi Arabia, we wouldn't be surprised to see them sign on too. Several European countries, meanwhile, including France and Italy, are reportedly waiting to see if the US enters the coalition before publicly announcing themselves. Washington.
That is so embarrassing. They're waiting for the US to announce if they're going to do it, if the US will sign on, and if the US will, then they will. They'll jump into it because now the US has. It's so embarrassing, dude. Like, have a backbone, right? As I don't know, it just goes to it just plays right into this narrative that the Europe is just this, or that some European nations are just basically proxy states of the United States. They're basically vassal states. The US will protect them militarily, will support them financially, and then if the US says, "All right, we're going to join this treaty," then these guys will jump into, or this whatever they're talking about.
Is historically hesitant to join supranational coalitions where it would not be running the show. This would be one based out of Riyadh, so there's genuine uncertainty as to how all of that would work out. But given the way things are going in Hormuz, and reports coming in that the US Navy is stretched thin, this very well could be a moment where the White House says, "You know what? You take this one." Where that ultimately goes is anybody's guess. But the way things are looking, there's likely going to be another conflict in the Middle East that we'll be keeping you updated on regularly. And combined with the issues in Hormuz, this one has the potential to wreak economic carnage across much of the world. Thank you for watching.
Definitely check them out, you guys. War Fronts. We love this channel now that we found them. Super good information. It's relevant, it's new, and it's accurate. Couple things I wrote down that I wanted to cover with you guys, then we'll wrap it up. Something that I've harped on so much about my disappointment with the way the United States has handled supporting Ukraine is the fact that it's what the precedent is, the precedent that was set because because the whole idea of supporting Ukraine was other countries basically throwing money at and supplies into Ukraine rather than doing anything, putting any boots on the ground. I'm not saying to fight, but putting boots on the ground to help do anything logistically or supply wise. No, it was all just like here's a big check, or here's some weapons that we don't use anymore, which is great, and it absolutely has played a major part in Ukraine's defense, right? But that said, all that Russia saw and all the enemies that the free world saw is that they could illegally, full scale, militarily invade another nation and nobody will do anything except for throw stuff from the sidelines. That's what everybody saw. That's what China saw. And then all of a sudden, after Russia did this, all of a sudden the idea of this Taiwan invasion started surfacing, and all these military patrols and training started happening around the outskirts of Taiwan that China was doing. It's like, yeah, because we just proved to China that you could do whatever the hell you want, and the U.S. won't do anything. So that precedent that was set is one of the things that makes me so uh, discouraged with United States support. And so, with that said, I had the exact same stance with the war in Iran. That's why I supported the idea and still support the idea of an actual land invasion into Iran, because there needs to be a strong precedent sent. Yeah, a strong precedent made, or strong precedent sent to the enemies of the free world. Because what happens if we don't? Things like China and Taiwan could happen. Things like the Houthis and the Red Sea or the Suez Canal, right? What did the Houthis see when this war in Iran kicked off? All they saw, they didn't care that Iran started getting pummeled by missiles. That's not new to any of those countries, dude. They've been dodging missiles for decades. All they saw was that Iran was able to successfully hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage, and in turn, basically bring the United States, this massive giant, to its knees and actually start to make concessions to Iran. Granted, the United States retracted those concessions when they realized Iran wasn't going to hold up to their end of the bargain, and started more military action in Iran. But still, that doesn't matter, because what all the enemies of the free world saw was Iran hold the strait hostage, and the United States administration flail and flop around like a fish out of water, not knowing what to do. Do we attack more? Do we not? Do we give them what they want? Do we ask European nations to help? And it does. Instead of, in my opinion, what should have happened, you respond with extreme force. The second that we understood, which we should have understood this prior to moving into Iran already militarily, but the second that there was intelligence coming into the Pentagon, coming into the United States intelligence services, that Iran was going to start holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage, it's full scale, all hands on deck, absolutely annihilate the IRGC. I'm talking, we're pulling in Marines, are storming the beaches, dude. We're bombarding with battleships from the coast. We're bringing full Air Force, full Navy air power. Absolutely demolish them, because then, and only then, do the enemies of the free world, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, ISIS, right? Only then do they see, whoa, okay, we don't want that to happen to us. Imagine if we did that, right? We had a much more aggressive and dominant response to Iran taking the Strait of Hormuz. Imagine if we did do that. There's no way, in my opinion, in hell, the Houthis would even consider doing this, right? Because like in this video, the Houthis do have, you could tell, a little bit more intelligence when it comes to just blindly following Iran. They're still a terrorist organization. They are still a proxy of Iran, but you could tell they have some more critical thinkers than groups like Hamas, for example. And if the Houthis saw what happened in Iran, and there was just this full scale aggression when they tried to take the Strait of Hormuz, there's no way the Houthis would try the exact same thing. No way. So that's really the big thing I wanted to harp on. It's all about the precedent that is being set. When America looks weak, the world looks weak. When America looks like it was brought to its knees because the Iranians were able to make oil over $100 a barrel, that everybody was like, wow, there's the Achilles heel. You just hit their money. Just hit their money and they'll back down. So rather than being like, yeah, make it $200 a barrel, full scale annihilate these guys, go. Which should have happened, in my opinion. All right, guys, let me know what you think, man, because there are some of you guys that completely agree with my stance, which is definitely a more extreme opinion, and there's some of you guys that are like, no way, no way, we shouldn't be doing any of this. Basically, we should just be focusing in the USA. Um, and in my opinion, you can't focus just in the USA because bad actors will just continue to grow and then become bigger problems for the USA in the future. So, which we've seen happen in the past. All right, let me know what you think. Great video, man. I love you guys. We'll see you in the next one.